What is up, guys? Delboy here. So Callum Smith decisively beats George Groves in the 7th round to become the new WBA super middleweight champion, and also he wins the World Boxing Super Series super middleweight tournament. First things first, all the credit in the world to Callum Smith. I've never really, although I've always felt Callum Smith has been a good fighter. You know, he's well rounded, he's well schooled, but I've never really been that high on him, and I've always been doubtful on how far he can go, and I felt this was the type of level where he'd actually come unstuck. But he boxed a career best fight. He really boxed well, you know. Outstanding boxing display from Callum Smith. In general, actually, up until the stoppage, the fight was really good. The fight was really competitive. George Groves, he was more active with the jab. You know, he was kind of varying it from body to head, you know, using that jab well at times, scoring with it quite effectively. And he was landing some big shots. But, you know, Smith was the guy who was actually trying to counterpunch the counterpuncher. George Groves, historically, has always been a bit of a counterpuncher, but Callum Smith was timing him very well. You know, George Groves has a low left hand, and when he comes in straight. His head doesn't really move. And he was timing that right hand on George Groves very well. That was a shot that was working for Callum Smith throughout this fight. He was countering George Groves very well. You know, George Groves historically has always had a problem with blocking he's always had a problem with getting hit by counter right hands, and that continued tonight. And Callum Smith obviously done his homework, as did obviously Joe Gallagher. So credit to them for that. You know, Callum, like I say, countering really well. Both guys at super middleweight can punch, but you know, Callum Smith was taking George Groves' power really well. Actually, Callum Smith never really looked hurt to me, but George Groves, there were a few times when he was wobbled with shots. You know, a couple of right hands buzzed George Groves, and you always felt, although the fight was very competitive. I had the fight after 6 rounds, 3 rounds apiece. You know, it was very competitive, but I always felt watching it that George Groves was one shot away from disaster. And it turned out that's what happens. You know, in the 7th round, George Groves got caught with a lovely counter left hook from Callum Smith. That rocked George Groves. After that, Callum Smith displayed clinical finishing instinct. Pushed him against the ropes, great shot selection, lovely body shot that hurt George Groves, and you know, Callum Smith finished Groves ruthlessly against the ropes, and the referee was right to wave it off. Excellent performance from Callum Smith. I can't get over how good he looked. You know, I really didn't think he had that in the locker, but you know, I always hold my hands up when I'm wrong. I got this one wrong. I felt George Groves was going to win this fight. I really did. But credit to Callum Smith, man. He boxed really well, and it was thoroughly enjoyable to watch. You know, both guys, I felt, fought a good fight, but Callum Smith was the better man on the night. There was no excuses from George Groves. He didn't blame his shoulder. He said it was okay. You know, he gave Callum Smith all the credit in the world. That was definitely nice to see. Now, for me, Callum Smith, after winning that fight, I've got to rank him as the #1 super middleweight. You know, I felt George Groves was the #1 in the division. I rank Callum Smith as the man, above Gilberto Ramirez, above David Benavidez, above Jose Uzcategui. You know, I think Callum Smith is the #1 guy at the minute. And, you know, I want to see him in unification fights. You know, fights with Benavidez and Gilberto Ramirez, they're great fights. You know, I don't think, you know, Jose Uzcategui, if he fights Callum Smith, I can't see that being a bad fight. You know, I'd love to see Callum Smith unify. I wouldn't be surprised if Eddie Hearn tries to get James DeGale as Callum Smith's first title defence, because ultimately, I think, you know, James DeGale still has somewhat of a name. Some people will see him as credible, and Eddie Hearn will see that as a big money fight and maybe low risk. You know, James DeGale in recent fights has looked really shop-worn, so you know, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Callum Smith versus James DeGale soon. I really wouldn't. You know, I know Eubank's supposed to be fighting him, but You know, maybe Eddie Hearn will come in with a big offer, who knows. But yeah, Callum Smith, I'm looking forward to seeing how his career unfolds at world title level. And as for George Groves, he's saying he's not going to retire. Where does he go from here? Does he move up to light heavyweight? You know, maybe that could be good for him, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this defeat really affect him. Now, when George Groves took his defeats to Carl Froch and Badou Jack, I wasn't one to write him off. He was still a young man. He still had the hunger of becoming a world champion to get himself motivated. He doesn't have that anymore. He achieved his dream of becoming a world champion, and he was obsessed with that. That got him, you know, that really picked him up from those defeats to Carl Froch and Badou Jack. He's been a world champion, now he's lost. It's going to be interesting to see how he recovers from that. What type of motivation is he going to need to get back to that level? It's going to be interesting, it really is, to see where George Groves goes from here. I think he may struggle now, I've got to be honest. I'm not saying he's done, but I think he's got a hard task to reach the elite level again and win at that level. But we'll see what happens. George Groves, you know, he's a good fighter, good power. You know, he's certainly going to be involved in another fun fight or two. So we'll see what happens. But credit to Callum Smith, boxed an excellent fight, thoroughly enjoyable to watch. What did you guys think? Peace.